It's time for the chip race.
For our strategy segment this week, we're going to take a look at a hand that I played at the Unibet Open Dublin in late November of last year. Now, this was a televised hand. It was on the live stream. Essentially, this hand is a bit of a GTO versus exploit example. I do quite a big divergence toward the end from what would seem to be a more standard play, and the reasons for that will come out in the wash. So we'll get right to it. I open ace-5 in the cutoff. I'm playing relatively deep. Richie O'Neill, a regular on the Irish poker scene who finished quite high in the Irish rankings actually in 2018. Flats 6-4 of hearts. A loose enough call from the small blind.
Yeah, there's a couple of things we should say about this hand from the start. First of all, I watched this hand for the first time to prepare for this piece, and the first thing that jumped out at me was I was surprised that you appeared to be opening for over 2.5 big blinds with a hand as weak as ace-5. But I think what we've ascertained is that the blinds had actually just gone to 8 and 16. So you open for a min raise, which is fine with this hand. It's probably the worst hand we should be opening. We probably shouldn't be opening ace-4 off. But with it being a tournament with big antes, I think we should be opening this hand. If we're opening this hand, it means that we're opening about 33% of hands, which seems about right. You described Richie's defend of the small blind as quite loose. In his defense, I would say that against a passive pot controlling fish, you're going to realize your equity more with 6-4. But yeah, normally wouldn't be recommended. I played quite a bit with Richie, and I know he does like these types of hands. So my perception of his range is that he's missing all of the top hands. Your aces, your kings, your queens, your ace king, all the hands that he would 3-bet. But he has a lot of these type of hands which are, playable but not particularly strong.
Yeah, he likes a pretty hand, I think it's fair to say. Well, the pot is 9,200. The flop comes 6-6-4. I don't realise it yet, but that's a favourable flop for my opponent and his 6-4. He checks, and with ace-5 here, I elect check back. I think this is a pretty standard check back. I have the 5 in my hand, so I can call on a lot of turn cards when I pick up some straight equity. Also, I can call just because I have ace-high, and I can be a little bit sticky with this hand, I think, for at least one street just on its own. And I think in this particular scenario as well, while a bet will achieve some things, it may just clean out some equity of like sort of 9, 10, 10 jack, jack queen type of hands that he might have. It also opens the door to be check raise on a board that I don't have too many 6s, I don't have too many 4s.
Yeah, this is an interesting spot. This comes up quite a lot, and I think people often have a misconception about these types of boards in that they think they favour the defender more than they actually do. I mean, while it might be true that he might have more 6s and 4s than you, and he can have a hand like he has 6-4 suited, which you can't. I mean, that's a pretty narrow range of hands. If we think back to the pre-flop ranges, you are opening hands above a certain strength, ace-5 being the weakest. So you can still have all the top hands like aces, kings, queens that he can't have. So while he can have some super strong hands, you have more, very strong hands in this board as well. So this is actually a pretty good board for you. So based on that, this is a board that you can bet more than he can. He can't really bet this board at all. When he checks, I think you should probably be betting over half the time. You can make an argument actually for just betting 100% and using a small sizing. That's a coherent strategy. If you put it to a solver, what's going to come back is it's going to want to bet some hands and check some hands. And your hand, I think, makes a perfect check. It's not going to fold out anything better when it bets, and it's not getting called by too many worse hands. So in that sense, it is a perfect check. So I think your check on the flop is probably the best line.
So I do check, and I'm glad to hear that PO approved decision. The turn is a 6, so he's been upgraded to quad 6s. For me in this spot, I felt like Richie really has to start doing his own betting now. I can have maybe some strong hands that I've decided to take a street out with. I certainly should have a lot of call one street hands because I have elected to check back on the flop.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like you nearly always have a one street hand here actually once you've checked the flop, apart from maybe a few slow played monsters. But if we also think range, on the flop already we said that it was more likely he has a 6, also more likely he has a 4. You're probably not opening ace 4, whereas he probably is calling with ace 4. And once the flop goes check, I think his range strengthens much more than your range, because you would have bet, I'm pretty sure if you had a 6, you'd want to start building a pot. You would have bet some of your over pairs, both for equity denial and for value. So once it goes check, your range becomes very heavily weighted towards exactly the type of hand you have, ace high with decent showdown, but can't really withstand too much heat. So I think given that, his best bet to get more than one street out of you is to start betting himself now. If he bets now, you pretty much have to call, and then maybe you'll call the river as well. You might improve on the river, and that's probably his best shot at getting 2 streets.
Yeah, and I think that is fair to say. And I certainly considered it. Once he checked the turn, it crossed my mind that he did probably have a 10 jack, a queen 10 type of hand. And actually, it wasn't any harm to make a fairly small bet here to deny equity. Also for value, maybe he would float with that sort of hand, hoping to catch a pair. I don't know. So I do bet. I think I bet 3,500, roughly 1/3. I like that sizing in game, but actually, Dara, I know you've done a little bit of research into this one and think I can get away with smaller again.
Yeah, once I saw this, I immediately thought that this was too big, because essentially all you're trying to do with your bet is to deny equity to hands like Queen Jack. Now, with only one card to come and only 6 outs, you don't have to bet very big for him to have to fold that hand or else make a mistake by calling. So I felt that probably something more towards 20 to 25% of pot would have been a better sizing. Having put it through the solver does prefer the 20% sizing, which pretty much gets the job done against the folding part of his range. Obviously, he's never folding the 6-4, but that's neither here nor there. We have to think about his whole range.
Absolutely. And I thought that was a good point to extract from this. There is a bigger theme to this hand, but I think maybe for a lot of players, particularly live players, a 1/3 bet is maybe as small as they go in a lot of situations where, of course, we know in vogue now, maybe helped along by the solvers over the last few years, that one big blind bets, 20%, 25% bets are actually pretty normal these days, that they actually operate as very good continuation bet sizings on certain boards. And just maybe for you guys out there to have a little think about your sizings, maybe when you just kind of automatically maybe bet the same as you put in pre-flop, which will always kind of be about 1/3, you can actually go a little bit smaller in those situations.
Yeah, totally. Like I said, we just have to think about what our bet is trying to achieve, and really our bet is trying to just deny equity to 2 random cards higher than a 6 that are behind us right now but have 6 outs. So with only one card to come, those hands only have roughly 15% equity. So if we bet 20-25%, he's making a mistake calling with them, and he's folding away 15% equity if he folds.
So I do make a bet. I bet 3,500. Richie calls that 3,500. Now that I've seen the hand, I definitely expect him to go for a check raise in this spot.
Yeah, I think this might be the most surprising decision in the whole hand. When I watched this hand for the first time, I assumed he was going to bet the turn, but when he didn't bet the turn, I thought, okay, well, he's going for a check raise. But then you bet and he just called. I understand it in the sense that he basically has his board absolutely smashed. Like, you can see all 4 6s and 2 of the 4s. So it's very, very difficult for you to have anything. But I think he still has to try and think, well, what's the best way for me to get 2 or more bets? And I think the check call line is not necessarily it, because it's going to be hard to extract value on the river unless you actually have a hand, because the check bet call and then suddenly lead on the river line looks ridiculously strong, and I think it's going to be harder to get paid off than the check raise on the turn.
Yeah, and I got to say, the check raise on the turn would have seemed really fishy to me in game had it come, because, you know, he's basically polarizing himself to a 6, or maybe sort of trying to take control of the hand with a medium pair and seeing if I'll react with another raise, so that maybe he doesn't lose too many chips if it's kind of overpair against overpair. I'm not really sure. I think it would have been fishy enough that maybe he'd have got a cry call out of me.
I think you're supposed to call your hand, to be honest. I mean, if you're going to bet fold a hand as strong as ace-5, that seems a bit too much folding. Given the sizing that you're using, this is essentially an equity denial bet, but also to some degree a value bet as well. It's not a bluff. I mean, if you have 8 high or 9 high, then you're clearly bluffing. And given that those are hands which definitely have to give up to a check raise, I think ace-5 probably would have to continue to a check raise call one. It obviously depends on his sizing. But yeah, I think you're right. It would look a little bit fishy.
So now to the river. Well, I'm guessing you guys at home are expecting something interesting, and I will provide something interesting. The river comes at 5, making me the top boat that is available on the board. Of course, there are overpairs that make better boats, and of course, the 6 sitting in Richie's hand makes him quads, which means I cannot beat him. He then leads at me for 10k. Pot is about 16k. And immediately on commentary, the guys are like, oh, the worst card in the deck for Dave, he's going to have to pay them off. And that is certainly what was going through my head at that moment. I felt like, oh, well, like, I guess he can have a 4 a lot here, and I now have to call because I have a 5. I didn't really consider any value in raising, although I think you're going to maybe open me up to the world of other creative possibilities. But in that situation, yeah, I just felt like, wow, okay, piece it together, Dave. What is he doing here? One thing I would have to point out at this point is Richie's body language was unbelievably strong. And you can see that on camera.
Yeah, it's a good point made in what's an audio medium. He does look ridiculously strong. We'll presumably put this up on YouTube at some stage for people to view. But when I saw him, I thought, oh man, how strong does he look? When the flop comes down, he almost looks like it's Christmas. And he's very watchful. He's watching you. He's clearly very interested. He checks quite ostentatiously. And it's clear that he hasn't given up on this hand. And he's quite happy with the hand. And there's a bit of to and fro with you in terms of speech play. And it's just obvious that he's really happy with life. It's a weird river situation now because, to be honest, we shouldn't really be in this spot. He should have either bet the turn with his hand or check raised when you give him the opportunity to. So in GTO land, let's say, you both get here with very weak ranges because all of your strong hands should have played differently. Your strong hands should have started betting on the flop. His strong hands should have led the turn or check raised the turn. So you both should really arrive here with very weak ranges. Given that that's the case, when he bets, he should be betting a mix of bluffs, and even a 4 is strong enough to bet for value now, given how weak your range is. So in a situation where you are beating some of his value bets and all of his bluffs, in game theory land, this is a slam dunk call. You can't consider anything else. In fact, it's probably even strong enough to raise. He really shouldn't have anything stronger than a 4. Now we know he has, but he really shouldn't have anything stronger than a 4 because the hand stronger than 4 should have played differently on the turn. So given that he is at the top of his range with a 4 and he can't just call 4s, he should also be calling some ace highs, I think, if you raise. So you can actually get called by worse if you go for a raise here.
Now, as Dara said, we will put this up on YouTube, and I hope I will be somewhat vindicated in my very exploit strategy here.
Yeah, I play quite a bit with Richie as well. As you said, he's a regular on the Irish scene. He goes deep a lot in tournaments. So we've all had a fair amount of table time with him. Richie's definitely capable of moves and bluffs. We both know that, and we know that he's quite loose pre-flop. So he can have hands that other people might not show up with here. That said, my experience of Richie, like most live players, is that if he's going to bluff, he does it in whatever the most straightforward manner is. And if you think about somebody wanting to bluff in this spot, the obvious spot to start bluffing on is on the turn after the flop goes check, check. Taking the line of deciding to check call the turn to bluff the river, that's a pretty elaborate, sophisticated bluff line. And in my experience, live players really don't take that line. So anytime you see the early streets go check call and then suddenly you're led into on the river, in my experience, live in particular, that's almost always weighted towards value.
Yeah, and I suppose that goes against the GTO solution that we spoke about a moment ago, where obviously we're just meant to call, and maybe we're still meant to call anyway, because if you have a 4 in your hand, that's still a lot of value for Richie, and I still could have been folding the worst hand, but I did fold, and as I said on commentary, I'm going to look like an idiot or a genius here. I guess it made me look like someone who had read the situation well, but to be honest, I'm not that naive. I know that plays like that are a bit above the rim, and by being a bit above the rim, they're not going to be solver approved, and you're in the realm of trusting live reads, and that's a very fuzzy guesswork, hoping to guess right more often than not, place to put yourself in. And I really was keen to know what the solver would say and what you would say, Dara. And I guess you are sort of more justifying my fold, maybe because you picked up some of the live stuff I did as well. But it's really interesting to see at all those decision points what we both did. Yeah,
this is a massive divergence. I mean, there's no two ways about it. Players like Doug Polk, when they talk about diverging, they say it's okay to make small divergences. In other words, if it's a pretty close decision but you feel the guy is strong, then fold. If it's a pretty close decision and you think the guy is weak, then call. That's fine, even if it's like minus EV when you make the call or slightly plus EV when you make the fold. In this case, it's massively plus EV. I mean, the fold is about 20 big blinds worse than the other options. So if you were up against somebody who knew your tendencies and knew that you could make these type of folds, they could exploit you massively by making these river bets. And that's what it always comes down to in these GTO versus exploit spots. Even if you know the game theory, you have to ask yourself, how close to game theory is the other player playing? And I mean, I think we've shown that Richie basically fell out of the game theory tree on the turn by playing his hand passively.
Yeah, a fascinating hand. I hope you guys enjoy our coverage of it here in audio form. If you'd like to go watch it yourself, you can find it as part and parcel of the day one coverage at Unibet Open Dublin. We will make a video of it, I'm sure, in the not too distant future. Dara O'Kearney, as usual, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave, and good fold in this case.
One time.